As the unassuming guide whose words of wisdom inspired a new wave of martial artists, he was the film's beating heart. In reality, though, Pat Morita's journey was fraught with turmoil. The guy responsible for giving birth to Mr. Miyagi finally spoke out just before he passed away, spilling the beans about what really happened on set. There were fights that the camera never captured, in addition to the lines, kicks, and crane poses. Over the years, what truth did he hold, and why did he save it for last? The wall prior to Miyagi, whenever the Karate Kid is mentioned, quickly envision Mr. Miyagi, the subdued handyman who helped Daniel LaRusso through his worst hours, with his knowing stare, shortened speech, and subtle power. The fact that the man who became Miyagi had very little opportunities was something that the majority of fans were unaware of, until Pat Morita himself made a statement some years later. One of the most influential people in Hollywood at the time was hell-bent on preventing him from ever auditioning for the part. Pat Morita's main claim to fame was as a comedian. Fans will always remember his comedic TV appearances, snappy one-liners, and a natural talent for delivering comedic timing. He was the only candidate, according to many executives, who could play the role of a mentor who was emotionally bruised and battle-hardened. The name Marita floated into the room during casting sessions for the character of Mr. Miyagi, but producer Jerry Weintraub quickly slapped it away. The industry heavyweight Weintraub allegedly lost it and said he didn't want a comic involved in any way with this scene. His ideal candidate would have gravitas, be a heavyweight, and convince people that he could carry both sorrow and knowledge kept hidden. You saw the wall there, and that wall remained unmoved for weeks. Weintraub consistently rejected Marita's name whenever it appeared on a list. America, in his view, was teeming with actors who would be a better match. Weintraub needed players that looked the part, had the right voice, or had the right family history, so producers and casting directors sought wherever else. Patrick Morita, totally disregarded when doing the reading. But this is when everything started to go wrong. After demonstrating his talent for underdog stories with Rocky, director John Avildsen had no desire in returning to the same formula. He realized that the success of the Karate Kid hinged not only on intense battle scenes or training montages, but also on a genuine and authentic connection between the instructor and mentee. He was determined to investigate thoroughly, not skimping on any detail. Regardless of Weintraub's opinion, Avildsen was adamant that all potential candidates be read. Afterwards, Pat Morita would think about how strange it was to be a part of that entire cattle call procedure. He was practically an afterthought and the last actor cast when his opportunity finally came. The irony, which had previously gone unnoticed by the producer, was now being pointed out to him as a result of the director's determination. At that very instant, for an actor whose career had been severely limited to brief appearances on television and stand-up comedy engagements, this was more than simply an audition. Unexpectedly, he had a shot at a role that everyone else was determined to deny him. For Morita, it demonstrated how Hollywood could be so unpredictable, how rejection could subtly pave the way for a new opportunity the following day. In the past, when Miyagi was beloved by all, it could be easy to overlook the brief period when there was noticeable tension during casting discussions. But it would stay with Morita forever. After Weintraub's group almost destroyed the project before it even began, he spoke frankly about it later in life. Morita said that John Avildsen's obstinacy was the single most important factor in altering the trajectory of his career. More than just another fight between actors in the shadows, this shows how precarious the process of becoming a cinematic icon can be. Everything changed in that split second due to a producer's snap decision or an executive's carelessness. Morita might never have set foot in that audition room had Avildsen not stood firm. The Karate Kid as we knew it would have been drastically different if Morita hadn't been a part of it. In his artistic pursuits, the wall he eventually encountered proved to be resistant. After all, walls ought to be hacked through or scaled, as Pat would playfully suggest throughout the years. Pretty soon after that, he was in a completely different situation, one that not even a member of the audience could possibly link to the polished clown they remembered. Simply put, the sharp-suited TV comic wasn't the man who entered the audition room. Upon returning from Hawaii, he appeared as a weary, bearded man, a reflection in the mirror that he scarcely recognized. Fate Hawaii and Beard Pat Morita's career was in a state of flux by the early 1980s. Had previously experienced stardom in stand-up clubs and in comedies like Happy Days, but offers had diminished and the limelight seemed to be fading. In Hawaii, he ended up emceeing political fundraisers, penning ad copy, and performing in nightclubs as he scraped together a living instead of pursuing parts in Hollywood. It didn't have much glitz or stability, but it was enough to pay the bills. From the outside looking in, Marita's career appeared to be gradually waning. He thought he was just floating around, waiting for something he couldn't see. Then he made a choice that altered his reputation irrevocably. He allowed his hair and beard to grow out for the first time ever, not for that part. The purpose is not entertainment, for no other reason than that he fancied a change. In retrospect, Pat found it funny, joking that he appeared more like a hippie than an actor. He was indifferent about it back then. He had little interest in pursuing casting directors or worrying about how he would seem on television. He allowed his outward look to mirror the less polished and unsure phase of his life. He was just existing. It was fate that led him to grow that scruffy beard, so out of character for him. Unbeknownst to him at the time, that expression contributed to giving the appearance of a rugged man who has endured adversity when the opportunity to audition for the Karate Kid finally arrived. He seemed more mature, smart, and down-to-earth than the comedian his fans had grown to expect. What began as an individual decision turned out to be a blessing for his career in the making. Silence had become Pat's life's motif, and he had long accepted this. Truthfully, he nearly considered letting his agent contract expire when its expiration date approached. However, he reconsidered and was giving his agent a sort of half-hearted reappointment. What on earth? He was so prepared to go back to Hawaii that he left his agent's office one day, certain that he would not find any work there. Then, with a resounding yell, Destiny stepped in. The secretary bolted out the door, yelling that Pat Morita had just gone out, after hearing a loud voice yell, "Pat Morita," from up above. "Pat, get your butt back in here. There's a script I think is perfect for you." The agent reached out and waved him in hurriedly. The script in question was The Karate Kid. This plot seems too perfect for a Hollywood film. Someone should make a film on fate. It was more like a dream. Marita recalled afterwards. He had accepted that nothing was waiting for him in Los Angeles, and stood there with one foot out, ready to travel. The script suddenly dropped into his lap, as if by some miraculous intervention at the last second. He perused it. To him it was ideal. Subsequently, he consented to try out for John Avildsen. Just another chance, another room, another director. It didn't feel like a life-altering event at that point. However, the execution, all of a sudden, the beard and the serendipitous return to the building at that exact moment, started to fit together to form a grander plan. After the fact, Marita recounted the event with awe, as if an unseen force had guided him back to his true path. He would not have resembled Miyagi had he not been in Hawaii. If he hadn't re-signed with his agent, nobody would have had a script to offer him. Fortunately, luck was on his side that day since he shuffled his feet on the sidewalk. Every seemingly insignificant choice, mishap, and turn of events led to a single opportunity to try out for a part that the producers had originally rejected. Upon entering the audition room, he saw that instead of a panel of judges or a table of executives, there was just one man with a camera fastened to his body, observing him through the lens. In Avildsen's one-man camera test, Pat Morita anticipated the stereotypical Hollywood setup when he was given the opportunity to read for The Karate Kid, a casting assistant, a producer making notes, and possibly even a writer lurking in the corner, all eagerly awaiting their time to critique his every word. He instead entered a sparsely populated room and proceeded to undergo one of the most peculiar auditions of his professional life. John Avildsen, a director who had already made his mark on cinematic history, sat there, alongside Rocky. But Avildsen wasn't mindlessly working from a script or perusing a desk. A hybrid of man and machine, he possessed hybrid characteristics. He had a camera resting on his side. Meanwhile, he lugged around the cumbersome battery pack that rested across his chest. Without ever putting down the camera, he gave a cordial introduction. Marita was being taped the second he walked foot in the room. Later in life, Marita would make fun of the fact that he initially thought of Avildsen as a half-man part director, part recording equipment. Avildsen wanted to see more than simply a professional read, so he poked fun at it. To test Pat's Miyagi potential, while others doubted it, he aimed to capture the man's unvarnished presence. "Give me some background," Avildsen asked, his gaze fixed on the camera, so Pat began to talk, not from a script, but from anecdotes about his life and work. He wasn't auditioning in the conventional sense at that moment. He unlatched a window frame into his true identity. Avildsen continued to roll. We moved on to the script. Even for the most challenging sequences that had not been produced, choreographed, or anything else, Pat would not recite a few of safe lines. The lack of sets, clothes, or a supporting actor forced him to improvise, but he threw himself into his role as Miyagi anyhow. He was expecting nothing more than a courteous thank you, and then departure after he finished. But just as he was about to go, Avildsen yelled out, "Pat, wouldn't you want to bring your script with you? You never know when you might need it." That was an exhilarating one-line. It was the first time Marita had a glimmer of hope that he had finally overcome his self-doubt. He had entered disguised as a bearded comic. He left with the impression that he had all the makings of Mr. Miyagi defies all difficulties. By this point, Avildsen had already decided he would play the footage again during later meetings when the producers were squabbling about potential casting options. Once during a particularly heated argument, he simply clicked the monitor while they were filming. There was a noticeable hush as Marita's audition popped up on the screen. "Hey, hold on a second," Weintraub yelled out, revealing that she was the one who had initially rejected him. "It seems like Miyagi," with an air of composure, Avildsen replied. "That's the Pat Morita you turned down when she was reading lines for the part." It was confirmed by the tape that Marita could act. It proved without a reasonable doubt that he was Miyagi. It was the fissure that initially began to weaken the defenses. Obviously, Hollywood isn't the type to part with anything without a fight. Despite the impressiveness of Avildsen's tape, Marita was repeatedly summoned back. Because they were producers, they needed to know for sure, might he be able to do it again? Does he have the costume skills to pull it off? Would Ralph Macchio be able to handle him? A delivery was made by Marita. Once more, the uncertainty gradually faded. But it all began with that one camera test, where Pat Morita was watched closely by a director who believed in capturing the truth on film, rather than a panel of skeptics. Testing will soon include a young actor from New York with him to determine the possibility of a genuine connection between instructor and pupil. For the majority of actors, a strong audition is sufficient. Nevertheless, there is one chemistry test in order to get a job. It took 5 for Pat Morita. Though John Avildsen's audio managed to convince some doubters, the filmmakers were still seeking more. They had to know for sure that the guy they had written off as a joke could really bring Mr. Miyagi to life. This was the first of 5 punishing sessions meant to determine whether Pat Morita could truly embody the role. 2 of the tests were just role-playing exercises. Is it possible for him to replicate the same nuance and passion? Beginning with his first audition, would he be able to channel Miyagi's subtle dominance without making fun of her? Marita never failed to deliver. He spoke with conviction, conducted himself with grace, and revealed glimpses of vulnerability that suggested Miyagi's backstory. Yet the stakes were upped with the third test. Ralph Macchio traveled all the way from New York. This time, could Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Smith's chemistry work? That was the question the producers sought answered. How does Miyagi feel about it? The script envisioned a relationship between a father and son, a guide and a disciple, rather than just a teacher and a student. The whole film would fall apart if Marita and Macchio couldn't connect. They would start out reading aloud simple dialogues, but soon move on to more dramatic content, such as wax-on wax-off moments, complete admissions of their innermost thoughts and feelings, and the eerily silent times that say more than words ever could. Rather than being inspired by Marita's connection with Macchio, the serious gravitas was instilled through his genuine, naturally flowing answer. His attention was captivated. He responded, and was a guide, as if he were someone he could confide in. Macchio gradually leaned into him. There would be an early sign of a collaboration to support the entire franchise if that were to happen.
Costumes were added on the fourth test because producers wanted more information before committing. Is it possible for Morita to resemble it? Completely donning a plain gay that emphasized his beard and hair, he transformed into someone else entirely. The normal funny or nightclub performer had vanished, influenced by time, experience, and a man stood in his stead, burdened by silent suffering. It was as if Pat became character when he dressed as Miyagi, an effect that even Ralph later acknowledged as shocking. Studio executives demanded assurances, guarantees, and more guarantees. The fifth and last test was the game changer. A frigid and deserted sound stage was the setting for their requested reading. There were only Marita, Makio, and the camera. No sets or props were used. It was the pinnacle of stress testing. Could magic be preserved under the harshest circumstances? The response came quickly. As if it were second nature, the two interacted. Instead of acting, Marita inhabited Miyagi. Makio was responding to a tutor who appeared very genuine. He was not delivering lines. There was an eerie stillness as soon as the camera ceased rolling. He had proven himself to be Miyagi in 5 separate auditions, which revealed more than just his acting chops. After then, Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita were no longer co-stars. They were Daniel and Miyagi, bound together for all time by a chemistry that went beyond generations. It had been a real ordeal, but it had created something permanent. Even though Morita had passed all 5 exams with flying colors, his destiny was sealed by a single phone call from the most ardent skeptic. The call that changed everything after Pat Morita made it through all the rounds of screenings, auditions, and chemistry reads. Jerry Weintraub remained a specter. Morita was almost denied a role in The Karate Kid, due to the formidable producer. He had his reservations about casting a comic. He had doubts about Pat's ability to carry himself with the gravity of a mentor. For weeks, Weintraub's uncertainty had threatened Morita's future. The room was turned upside down by the subsequent phone call. It took place following the 5th test, when the studio chiefs were entertained by Morita and Ralph Macchio in their costumes. A subtle conversation took place, rather than a dramatic sequence set to sweeping music or karate strikes. As a result of fatigue and instinct, Pat had fashioned that clipped, halting rhythm that Miyagi and Daniel were conversing in. Not in the manner of an actor reciting lines, Daniel responded, but he did so as a young boy on the advice of an adult who appeared concerned. The still scene was more powerful than any action scene could have been. As usual, Avilson allowed the camera to record. He had been Morita's defender from the start, advocating for his inclusion and circulating his film to show Weintraub the footage whenever the latter became contemptuous. With the place packed, Morita and Macchio were now unmistakable. No one laughed or doubted after the exam was over. Instead, there was complete quiet, an eerie stillness that may throw everything off. Weintraub took up the receiver. Morita, on the other hand, waited at home, uncertain if the character he had devoted himself to would go away. Weintraub was really direct. There was a new intensity in his voice, which was typically harsh and uncompromising. I nearly made the biggest error of my life, Pat, he confessed. Let me be the first to offer my congratulations. You are perfect for the role of Miyagi. Morita had hoped to use that position as a means of atonement for himself, declaring to the public in complete rebellion, not a comedian. Not Morita, his opponent was suddenly the one who had to face the consequences of his statements. The manufacturing power dynamic changed with the drop of a single phone call. The room, which had before belittled him, was now bowing down in reverence. According to Pat, he experienced a simultaneous sense of pride and shame. He refrained from making a fuss, boasting, or bringing attention to the fact that they were on the verge of excluding him. It seemed as if he had already accepted the role with an innate feeling of pride. Beyond his own career, he understood the significance of this triumph. Miyagi was meant to become a cultural hero, transcending his role as a mere figure. Even though it was a turning point for Morita, the picture benefited more from it. In light of Ralph Macchio knew his tutor, John Avilson, by heart. Jerry Weintraub had the guts to admit when he was wrong, and the production was tied up due to the co-casting of Miyagi. Because it was so challenging, Pat's win was all the more gratifying. The role did not come easily to him. A great deal of uncertainty forced him to scramble. With the weight of Weintraub's comments still hanging in his head, he could finally put himself in Mr. Miyagi's shoes. The part may be in the bag, but Pat Morita's fight was far from done. Now that filming had begun, he had a new obstacle, persuading viewers that Miyagi's terrible English was poetry, not humor. Finding out that I could play Mr. Miyagi was a major accomplishment. It was another to give Miyagi a voice that would live on in history. The way Miyagi spoke was crucial to the character, and Pat Morita was aware of that. Another wide-stroke Hollywood frequently utilized for Asian characters was a voice that veered too far into caricature, which ran the risk of becoming stereotyped. An immigrant janitor and war veteran, rooted in the imperfect rhythms of English learnt late in life, is depicted in the script. If it were overly polished and smooth, it wouldn't suit. Honesty and respectability were two sides of the same coin that Marita had to figure out. Ironically, it was fatigue that ignited the fire. Marita was exhausted from the hard process of proving himself during his early tryouts. His stamina dwindled, and he spoke in choppy, halting sentences. That's why Miyagi talks like this, Marita further clarified with a mischievous grin. Because he lacked the mental capacity to overthink, it emerged unplanned. However, Avilson and others detected a pattern. The rhythm wasn't clumsy or forced, rather, it had substance. It seemed authentic to Miyagi's past. However, Morita took great care in refining it. He embraced the image of a man who took his time to speak, as if he were an immigrant who had to think carefully about his words before speaking. This is not a flaw, but rather the shattered syntax evolved into a form of verse. The old knowledge that Miyagi imparts to Daniel, a man who catches flies with chopsticks can accomplish anything, lands like a knockout punchline rather than a joke. Because of the beat, listeners leaned in, as if each pause had significance. At first, the voice disarmed Ralph Macchio, as he would later admit. The comedian Marita was known to him for his quick wit and slick delivery. Words fell like pebbles into water as he found himself confronted with an entirely new individual. The contrast was magical. This new person was silent and nearly contemplative. In contrast to Miyagi's soothing, broken English, Daniel was a nervous wreck and fumbled through his sentences. There was a seamless blending of the two tempos. Naturally, there were a few who remained concerned in the studio. Did I go on for too long? Would people be laughing at the wrong things? Concerns for Marita were separate. He was aware that the use of accents in Hollywood had a negative rather than positive past. But he believed that if he gave Miyagi respect and used the voice for honesty rather than mockery, the character would transcend stereotypes. He was absolutely right. The way Miyagi spoke became an integral aspect of his charm, compassion and wit, rather than a joke. Away from the halting, stilted Miyagi tongue, it took great joy in a smooth yet nearly song-like continuum, disenfranchised above his voice, naturally like off-screen. When his admirers learned about this discrepancy in interviews, they were horrified. It was almost too good to be true. He must have been the same man who said, "wax on, wax off" with such a broken staccato, the polished, humorous one who shared stories and experiences with them. However, Marita's genius lay in his creation of a mask, a performance that blended in with its wearer to the point where it seemed genuine. It was no longer just an accent, that voice took on a life of its own. Children performed impressions, adults recalled them, and comedians made fun of them. A part of that cultural echo, though, always retained its gravity. Marita had brought to life a character who was equal parts dignified, humorous and sorrowful. Regardless of how meticulously Marita shaped Miyagi's voice, he would eventually face a irony on a deeper level. The part that salvaged his career simultaneously ensnared him in ways he would never be able to free himself from. For Pat Morita, The Karate Kid was more than a film. It was a watershed moment, a breath of fresh air after a lifetime of hardship. The world may remember Miyagi's tranquil wisdom, the wax-on lessons, and the crane kick, But Morita remembers more subdued moments from the set that shaped his friendship with the other actors and his own path through life. These were the times he would always remember. The famous drunk Miyagi scenario, which took place at night, was one of them. The studio wasn't sure it should be included. Production companies questioned if viewers would be able to bear witnessing the sage mentor's frailty, shattered by the trauma of losing his family in an internment camp. However, Marita battled for it. His heart and soul went into the scene, and the crew went silent as he stumbled through Miyagi's grief. No one clapped or commented after the cameras stopped rolling, as Ralph Macchio recalled afterwards. Instead, they let Marita to enjoy his alone. It was the night that proved to Pat that he could not just for laughs. When he spoke, people would cry. The catching the fly with chopsticks joke is another one that stuck with me because of how tiny and unscripted it was. Marita gave the moment a deeper meaning, even though it was originally scripted as a light comedy. His hands were steady, and his gaze was fixed on the impossible task at hand as he performed it with an almost childish concentration. Instead, when Daniel pulls it off, their chemistry explodes into real laughter. Miyagi was more than a teacher to Marita. He was a man who could laugh, compete and be surprised, a fact that the little scene helped to illuminate. Marita also had fond memories of her time spent with Ralph Macchio. While filming, Ralph was still a teenager coping with the pressures and pitfalls of celebrity, and Marita, being significantly older, also found himself in a protective role off-set. On and off camera, he imparted wisdom to Ralph through his wit and life experience. Several years down the road, the affection that Macchio called the heart of the movie, on screen and off, Marita felt it was genuine, and grew stronger with each performance they shared. Additionally, he remembers how the crew's initial suspicion eventually faded. There was a time when many of them wondered if the Happy Days comedian could pull it off. A shift, nevertheless, became apparent to Marita as the days passed. The stunt crew had begun to treat him with the deference usually accorded for humans by the time filming of the tournament sequences had begun. Different from the rest. In their view, he had transformed into a sensei, not merely an actor portraying the role. He carried that admiration with him even after the filming ended. This ceremony, like all the others that Marita concocted in the intermissions between takes, involved adopting Miyagi's voice. Not for the sake of the camera, but it helped him stay grounded. On occasion, he would offer crew members impromptu words of wisdom in a garbled form of English, half-spoken at his own rhythm, with the running joke that Miyagi was trying to teach kids valuable lessons in a change of scenery. For Marita, it was priceless proof that Miyagi wasn't just a figure in a story. He seemed to come alive for anyone who came close. What gave the film its spirit were all those things, laughter, stillness and chemistry, which Marita would realize in hindsight. He was aware of one thing, though the crane kick would endure in perpetuity. What concerned him, though, were the friendships formed in the set's more intimate areas, which he saw as proof that despite the Hollywood magic, something real had grown. Even in his latter days, as Pat Morita reminisced about these experiences, it was evident Mr. Miyagi was more than a character he portrayed. A true gift. It had an impact on him just as great as he had on it. Looking back, Pat realized that the Karate Kid gave him an opportunity no previous project had given him. The ability to be remembered as an artist who dedicated himself to a character who had an impact on people all over the globe, rather than just a comic who got lucky. To show your support, share your favorite Miyagi moment, and stay tuned for more behind-the-scenes insights from the Karate Kid. Hit the like button if Pat Morita's statements impacted your perception of the film. When you're ready, click on the video that appears next to discover another secret that the actors kept hidden for a long time.